The sound of the rain against glass was sharp, controlled, like everything else in his penthouse. Leon stared out across the icy Berlin skyline, the Spree River cutting a jagged path through the city's frost-bitten heart. Behind him, the room was spotless, no evidence of life, just quiet success, engineered silence, and a calendar full of power plays. But something was wrong. Since Camila left, time had lost definition. He went to meetings. He ate dinner alone. He reviewed projections, restructured timelines, and ignored emails from Annalise's team. Every move was calculated, but every moment felt untethered. She had unspooled him, not in some reckless movie scene explosion, but in a precise unraveling. Quiet truths, steady fire, the kind of honesty that had no agenda. And she was gone. He sat down heavily on the edge of the sleek gray couch. The leather groaned beneath him. His laptop pinged. A new message. From legal. Subject termination timeline. Roth-Hartman merger. He didn't open it. Instead, he reached for the drawer in the end table, pulled out a photo he never showed anyone. Mira. His first love, a journalist, younger than him by a few years. Kind. Smarter than he ever was at that age. She'd walked into his life at the beginning of the Hartman legacy, when all he had was ambition and a single seed round. They'd lasted 14 months, until the betrayal. Not hers, his. He hadn't cheated. He hadn't lied, but he'd used her by omission, allowed her access, then disappeared emotionally when things got real. When she asked to know the man behind the mission, he turned to stone. She leaked their texts after he ghosted her, told a half-truth to a tabloid. It went viral. The damage wasn't in what she said, it was in what he hadn't said first. He'd spent the next decade constructing a fortress, money, power, control, clauses. He never let anyone in without an escape plan. Until Camila. And now she was gone. Not because she betrayed him, but because he never let her in. He ran a hand down his face, voice a whisper in the room. I'm still hiding. Camila, Madrid. The apartment was small, full of sun and uneven floorboards. Her clothes smelled like lavender from the closet sachets her mother insisted on putting in every drawer. She hadn't lived in Madrid for 4 years, but coming back felt like inhaling the life she almost forgot she had. A new city. A different rhythm. No boardrooms. No billion-dollar egos. Just the clatter of coffee cups and the hum of the city waking up below. Camila walked through the NGO's open concept office, tucking her hair into a loose knot. The organization worked with refugee families seeking asylum in Spain. Her Spanish and Portuguese made her invaluable. But it wasn't just the work. It was the purpose. Something that didn't orbit around someone else's empire. She was rebuilding, piece by piece. The ache of Leon lingered, less like a wound, more like a phantom limb. A memory of heat, of almost. Some nights she would feel his presence like a pulse in her ribs, and yet she never once picked up the phone because she wasn't waiting. She was becoming. At night, she wrote again. Pages and pages in spiral notebooks, the way she used to before she traded poetry for contracts. The first story she worked on had no billionaires, no power games. Just a girl with a pen and a secret that changed her world. She smiled to herself as the words filled the page. He was not the story. She was. Leon, Berlin. At 3 a.m., Leon stood barefoot in his kitchen, watching the city glitter through floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd called off the engagement, cleanly, quietly. No press releases, just a signed document and a polite separation. Annalise hadn't fought it. In truth, she looked relieved. He'd also initiated a pause on the merger. His lawyers lost their minds. His board threatened to revolt. But Leon didn't blink. For the first time in years, he was making a decision not because it was smart, but because it was real, because control wasn't clarity. It was fear in disguise, and he was done being afraid of being seen. Camila, Madrid. On a Saturday afternoon, Camila sat in Retiro Park, her feet bare in the grass, a pen tapping against her lip. She flipped open her notebook and reread something she'd written the night before. You can't love someone if you only ever show them your armor. You have to let them see your skin, even the bruises. She stared at the words for a long time. Then, for the first time in weeks, she thought not about Leon's silence, but about his eyes when he listened. The way he memorized every nuance of her voice. How he'd stopped breathing just before he kissed her, like it cost him something. She missed him, but more than that, she missed what they could have been if he'd let her see all of him. She wasn't sure if she'd ever see him again, but she was no longer afraid to. New York buzzed with power, but not the kind that screamed. It hummed beneath the skin of skyscrapers, whispered through glass elevators, echoed in the click of high heels against polished marble. The annual Global Tech Futures Conference had taken over Midtown. CEOs, venture capitalists, journalists, translators alike poured into the Javits Center, their badges swinging, their ambition louder than any keynote. Leon had never liked conferences. He didn't like the speeches, the forced smiles, the theater of synergy. But this time was different. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to make something clear. In the packed ballroom, cameras flashed. The Roth-Hartman merger announcement had been expected for months, but today, Leon Hartman took the podium alone. No Annalise, no fake ring, no cold hand on his arm, just him. He adjusted the mic, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Thank you for being here. I'll make this brief." The room stilled, phones lifted. Reporters leaned forward. The merger between Hartman Ventures and Roth Global is no longer moving forward. A pause. Murmurs. "I take full responsibility for the dissolution," he continued, voice even. "The agreement was sound on paper, but business built on performance, not truth, eventually fractures." He looked out into the silence and added, "I won't build my company or my life on something that isn't real." The room erupted, questions shouted, hands raised, speculation already buzzing through every live feed. Leon stepped off the stage, ignoring all of it. Outside the ballroom, in the shadow of the press chaos, Annalise waited. She was dressed in steel gray, her arms crossed, but there was no anger in her face. Just release. "Well," she said, "that was brave." Leon gave her a quiet nod. "You deserve the truth, too." "I knew it wasn't working," she admitted, softer now. "But I kept thinking, if I just played it well enough, maybe it wouldn't matter." He looked her in the eye. "You weren't a pawn, Annalise." "No," she agreed, "but we both let ourselves become pieces on someone else's board." She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a tiny velvet box. He tensed. "You kept the ring?" She opened the box, and inside, instead of the diamond engagement ring, was a tiny figurine. A knight, from the chess set they'd joked about in their first negotiation. "You were always playing defense," she said, tucking it into his hand. "Maybe it's time to go on the offensive for something that actually matters." Camila felt his presence before she saw him. She was standing in a side hall, headset in, translating for a visiting panel from Chile. She hadn't expected to be assigned to this conference. It had come up last minute, a freelance favor to a friend. But the moment she saw his name on the speaker roster, her pulse had tripped. She told herself she wouldn't look for him. And yet, there he was, across the hall, just beyond the glass walls. No cameras now, no handlers, just Leon, and he was looking directly at her. Her heart clenched. She didn't move, didn't approach. If he wanted something different, he'd have to come get it. He did. Leon stepped into the corridor, every inch of him calm but sure, like a man who'd finally stopped running. Camila turned slightly as he approached, arms folded, expression unreadable. "I heard your speech," she said before he could speak. "And I saw her. Annalise, she didn't look broken." "She's not," Leon said. "Turns out she wanted freedom as much as I did." "And the merger? Dissolved. I called it off. A beat. Why?" He took a slow breath. "Because I realized I was trading truth for safety. And because you made me see that safety isn't the same as strength." Camila said nothing. Leon stepped closer, his voice low, raw. "I didn't just hurt you when I shut you out. I hurt myself, because I knew what I felt for you, and I still chose fear." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not here to make promises I don't know how to keep," he said. "But I can tell you this. I want the kind of life where I'm not hiding anymore, where I don't have to control every heartbeat just to feel safe." Her eyes flicked to his. "And me?" Leon swallowed. "You were never a scandal, Camila." He stepped forward, voice catching just slightly. "You were the only truth I ever wanted to protect." Silence. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. Not yet. She stared at him, studying every line of his face. He didn't look like a billionaire now. He looked like a man who'd finally arrived. Not with power, but with honesty. Camila took a step closer. "Say it again." Leon's voice broke open. "You weren't a mistake. You were the only thing that was real." And finally, she let herself reach for him, not because he needed saving, but because he was finally ready to be seen. They stood there in the quiet glass hallway, not kissing, not rushing, just being together. No contracts, no clauses, just the heat of something real and the beginning of everything else. Chapter 6, 1 year later. Mallorca. It was late afternoon on the coast, the kind of golden hour that made the sea look painted. The sky was quiet, shifting through soft tones of lilac and burnt orange, while the breeze carried the hush of contentment across the island. The world had kept spinning, tech empires pivoted, markets rose and fell, news cycles turned. But here, on a secluded crescent of shoreline near Dea, the only sound was waves smoothing over rocks and the faint scratch of pen to paper. Camila sat under a white umbrella, legs folded on a faded beach blanket, a notebook balanced on her knees. She still translated. Literary essays now, not boardroom briefings. Her name had appeared in 3 journals in the past year. And earlier that spring, one of her pieces, a first-person essay about language, distance, and belonging, had gone viral in the niche, fierce way only true stories do. She lived part-time in a small villa nestled against the cliffs, with a kitchen that smelled of rosemary and sea salt. She wrote in the mornings, swam in the afternoons. Her phone remained on airplane mode most days. She was no longer waiting for life to find her. She was living it. The crunch of slow footsteps behind her brought a smile before she even turned. She didn't have to guess. Leon. He never announced himself. He didn't show up with grand gestures or surprises. These days, when he visited Mallorca, it was with groceries in hand and a question in his eyes. Do you want company? She turned to look at him now, dressed simply in a white linen shirt and rolled sleeves, sand already clinging to the edges of his jeans. He looked tan, at ease. His beard had grown in just enough to suggest he'd let go of morning meetings. His phone was nowhere in sight. They hadn't rushed. After the conference, they'd talked for weeks, across cities and time zones. Not about fixing anything, but about learning each other again. For real, this time. Leon had stepped back from public life not long after. He'd sold a stake in Hartman Ventures and quietly invested in a platform helping underfunded startups across Latin America and Africa. No press, no splash. He was building again, but from the inside out. He walked down the sand now, barefoot, and dropped beside her, brushing a kiss to her shoulder in greeting. She raised an eyebrow. You're late? Blame the fisherman, he said, holding up a brown paper bag. He insisted I learn the name of every fish in Catalan before he'd sell me any. She laughed. I would have paid to see that. I almost cried over a sardine. Tragic, she said, eyes warm. They sat for a moment, watching the waves lap against the shore. The world outside the cove didn't matter. Finally, he looked at her. I read your new piece, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Which one? The one about the girl who never said I love you in any language because she was too afraid someone would translate it wrong. Her pen paused. You understood it? I lived it. A silence opened between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of what had been said, what had been forgiven, what had grown. Leon shifted slightly, brushing sand from his hands. I've been thinking, he said, about what next looks like. She didn't speak, just listened. I'm not here to offer a ring or a timeline, he said slowly. I don't want to name it before we live it, but I do know this. He reached for her hand, folding his fingers gently around hers. May I translate my life into yours slowly? Camila didn't answer at first. She turned her hand, letting her thumb graze his. He waited, not with expectation, but with openness. She finally looked up, her voice a whisper, but steady. Only if we write it together. He smiled then, the kind that broke across his face slowly, like the tide washing something clean. And she smiled back. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They walked the shore, hand in hand, barefoot on the edge of the world. Not a contract, not a clause, just a beginning. Written in truth and translated by love. Mallorca, 1 year later. The old projector sputtered to life just as the sun began to dip behind the hills. Camila adjusted the makeshift screen, a stretched white linen sheet tied between 2 olive trees in the backyard of their villa, and dropped onto the picnic blanket with a glass of white wine in hand. A breeze rustled the jasmine vines along the stone wall. Crickets stirred. A cat curled at the base of her lounge chair, utterly uninterested in the cinematic moment unfolding. Leon emerged from the kitchen. barefoot, holding a bowl of olives and a mismatched stack of paper napkins. "You made a program?" Camilla teased, pointing to a folded sheet of paper beside the wine bottle. He sat beside her, brushing a kiss to her cheek. "It's a curated experience." "You're ridiculous." "I'm romantic," he corrected and handed her the program. She unfolded it. At the top, in his unmistakably messy handwriting, an evening of films that changed nothing, but felt like everything. Subtitled in Spanish. For the girl who never needed translation, just honesty. Camila blinked, laughed, then tucked the note into her book like a keepsake. The first short film began, a black and white love story from the 1960s, spoken entirely in Italian. The subtitles flickered at the bottom of the screen, but neither of them read them. They'd seen it before. The point wasn't to follow the plot. The point was presence. Halfway through the second film, Camila shifted, leaning her head against Leon's shoulder. His arm curled instinctively around her, his thumb tracing circles into the hem of her linen sleeve. They didn't talk about the life they were building day by day. Not aloud. Not always. But it was there in the books they left open for each other, the passwords they shared, the arguments they now ended with humor instead of silence. They hadn't married. Not yet. They hadn't published photos. No public announcements. No rings. But she had keys to his Berlin apartment, and he had a drawer in her Mallorca villa full of sandals, notebooks, and espresso pods only he liked. A new life. Quiet, full, chosen. Later, when the stars had bloomed fully and the film reels wound down, Leon rolled onto his back and pointed to the sky. "You see that one?" She squinted. "Which?" "The one that looks like it's holding its breath." "That's not a thing." "It is now," he said, and turned to her. "You still afraid someone's going to mistranslate you?" She smiled. "No, not anymore." He brushed her hair back from her forehead, lingering there. "I still want to write it with you. Every day, still slowly." She kissed his hand, then whispered, "Then don't stop, not ever." And in the silence after, beneath the endless sky and flickering real light, two people who had once been too afraid to be known were now wholly understood, not by the world, but by each other. The Mistress Clause was a story about rules, risk, and the quiet kind of love that chooses you, even when it's inconvenient, complicated, and utterly real. If it left you feeling something, if you're still thinking about Camila's courage or Leon's quiet undoing, then don't go far. More stories are coming, more slow burns, more flawed hearts, more endings that feel like beginnings. If you want to be the first to read them, subscribe for more exclusive love stories that don't follow formulas, just feelings. Follow to stay up to date on future releases, behind-the-scenes notes, and bonus scenes.